Time is precious, and I got a good chunk of that with Johnny Clegg earlier today. This is what he had to say. How are you?
Me, I'm fine. From a health point of view, I've managed to get by 3.5 years now, and hopefully, getting into the 5% to survive 5 years. Because pancreatic cancer has got a very low survival rate, and I'm an outlier. I've managed to get by, and I think my toughest part of my journey will be the next 2 years. So I'm kind of geared up for that, but it's more of a mental thing.
What changes in your thought process, in your psyche, when you realize you're going through something like this?
I think it's that the open-endedness. When you pass 50 years old, when you're young, the world is a wedge looking this way, and then as you get older, the wedge starts coming in, and it gets narrower and narrower. But it's still open-ended, even in this narrowest part. When this happens to you, that closes down, and so one doesn't know how quickly and how your body is managing to fight the disease with all the assistance you're giving it. And I think all it does is it brings the intimations of mortality much closer. I think one tends to enjoy more. I feed my birds, I grow flowers, I've become a bit of a gardener.
Is it scary?
It was initially, but I went and attended a pancreatic conference in August this year in Boston. It's one of the top pancreatic professionals was doing a presentation on the status of pancreatic cancer, all the various research and what they were, So I just wanted to see what was out there, and I met. They've got a guy who's they had 5-6 pancreatic survivors. 16 years, 10 years, 8 years, 6 years, and one was 4 years. So in May next year, I will be 4 years. And I'll be going across again in February next year to the conference. Just meeting those people with the same condition, went through the same things I went through, did the same chemotherapy, had the same issues. It was a really nice moment, because you find a community, and you find you realize how indiscriminate it is. You've got a guy who's a computer programmer, another guy's I met a wonderful chap who's a lecturer in engineering in Tucson in Arizona, an Indian man who was going in for what I just had in his chest, because mine jumped to my chest into my lungs, and I had to have stereotactic radiotherapy to blast them out. So he had it before me, so I was on the finding out about it, and what's going on. So that helps.
Johnny Clegg, that amazing tribute. So powerful, I have to tell you, I haven't been able to watch it through to the end. I mean, how did that make you feel when you first saw it?
Well, I I was very teary-eyed when I saw it, because I didn't. It was really something that was happening at a distance.
Yeah.
I was in Johannesburg. I knew nothing about. I didn't know about the production or the arrangement or the filming or thereof, because it happened in such a weird way. The Element House has these little sort of artistic shows on the weekends from time to time, run by Paul Brand and Khan from the Parlotones. And they said, let's do a Johnny Clegg song.
Yeah.
And put it on YouTube as a tribute. And then Khan and Karen Zoid met, and they said, well, why don't we just invite artists to come? It just snowballed from there. And then we had the song. And my management, Roddy, and I had been looking for a charity. Something we'd worked through the problem of starting up a Johnny Clegg Foundation, and the cost of that is huge. You have to have, employ people. You have to run it. You have to have auditors.
You have to, checks and balances.
And all that stuff. So we were looking for a foundation which we felt was already well rooted in its project. Which was accountable, and which for me had an educational thrust. And by complete coincidence, the daughter of Paul Harris, who owns Element House, runs this educational foundation called the Clegg Foundation. So I looked at it, and Roddy said to me, well, why don't we use their infrastructure so that every penny goes to the Clegg Foundation, and you've got all the infrastructure there, all the accountability, it's all in place. And your contribution will be Johnny Clegg and Friends.
Yeah, fantastic. So meant to be.
Yeah. So it started off as a tribute to Johnny Clegg, and then it became part of the Clegg Foundation's charity drive.
And Roddy was just discussing numbers with you now. I mean, people are really contributing, which is wonderful.
It's been unbelievable. We've generated in 2.5 weeks 790,000 rand for the Clegg Foundation. And just a little bit about it. 90% of South African schools, the students only start to learn English in grade 4, which puts them at a terrible disadvantage later on.
What is it about the song? What do you think resonates with so many people when they hear it?
It was a hit in South Africa in 1993-94. It was a song dedicated to my dancer, Dudu Ndlovu, who had been assassinated in the political violence in that period. And it's a song about spirit crossing over, and it was a metaphor for South Africa, crossing over from the old to the new. It was a very difficult time because it was an interregnum where the old order wouldn't die, so the new order couldn't be born. And that 4 years, 1990 to 1994, was a very critical shaping year. And I believe that next year is going to be another key moment in our future as a country. So the crossing it became more than just a tribute to Dudu, but a kind of a song about that feeling that we are moving into a new order and moving into a new place. And I think, you know, as South Africa as a country, lots of things that we have to do to get to that new place, and we're still on that journey, and we still...
I mean, a little earlier we were sort of lamenting at where South Africa is now. It seems to have stagnated, if not regressed a little bit.
Yes.
I mean, what do you think is going wrong?
Well, you know, apart from the obvious shortcomings in our young democracy. Things like, service delivery, the ability to execute on policy. I think South Africa's policies are brilliant. I think the work that Parliament puts into everything, from education to environment, the policies are really grand, and it's just being able to execute on them and to
and why
make
can't
them work.
we? Is it corruption, maybe?
Yes, well, there's the corruption factor, and we seem to be in the last, I don't know, 7 years, to be gripped by this incredible materialism and this idea that you can't wait for tomorrow.
No.
Everybody wants everything now. Everybody wants everything to happen now.
But not really living in the moment.
Yeah, and nobody's actually investing in the future. We are in a crisis of an ideology of redistribution, without understanding that you can only have a proper redistribution system with a proper growth system.
Correct. Yes.
How do you grow the country? How do you grow the economy? How do you grow education? How do you grow all the pillars?
So it could complement each other.
So that we can redistribute without stealing money from the fiscus and from Eskom and from all of those things. So we've arrived. We have a lot of lessons to learn. We're a young democracy.
And I know issues that really shaped your music, migrants and miners, especially Africa Blue Sky. I mean, what made you understand the story that need to be told, and why did you tell it in the way that you did?
Well, I think mining was the major underpinning of the South African economy, and I mean at one point, there were 700,000-800,000 fully employed miners in the country, and I think we're down to about 160, 180. I don't know the figure, but it's really, really small compared to what it used to be. And also the mines have become depleted, and migrant work was part of that whole system. What has happened is that migrants have left the impoverished rural areas and have become part of the peri-urban sort of outclass, living on the edges, in Orange Farm and Diepsloot, and in these informal settlements, in shacks and cabins, and trying to work out how do we make a living here, because we can't make a living back home, and it's created another underclass, and so you have these incredible moments where black middle class suburbs. There's one in Pretoria which appeared in the news. Experiences a flood of immigrants from the rural areas who set up their little shanty towns and then start stealing the electricity from and so there's a huge class conflict developing, and this is part of South Africa's transformation. I believe this happens everywhere. It's just that it's new for us, and we struggle to put it into to create new mental boxes that we can put these dynamics into.
And how important is music as a tool to address social issues?
I never had any immediate political goals. I was never making a political I fell in love with the music and the dance, and
then how did you
politics found me? I had to deal with.
Well, probably because you were seeing it on a day-to-day basis. You could see the reality.
Well, I was being arrested and I was being stopped, and I was, I had such problems with caretakers of buildings, because on the weekends, street musicians would congregate in the workers' quarters on the top of buildings and sit around and swap songs. And I used to go up there, and then the white caretaker would catch me there, and I would be arrested for trespassing.
Why do you think your music was loved, so loved, internationally and locally?
I think because we came out of a system of cultural segregation. And what the apartheid government was doing was separating culture into different boxes, and on the radio, and the venues you could play at were all determined by race. So you had the Separate Amenities Act, you know, if there was a swimming pool, only whites here. If there was a basketball court, you know, if it was in Soweto, there were no white basketball players there. So this attempt to separate the races culturally, Sipho and myself in Juluka started to mix and create conversations between Western folk music, Celtic folk music, and Zulu street guitar music. And then we started to mix language. So we were initially not played on radio because it was against government policy. But my record company they found a way to get around it, because there would be like an international hour on Zulu radio where they played international music and some from Africa and whatever, and then we would appear there as international but living in our own country.
I wanted to just ask you about, you know, your international trips, which were massive, and it's quite interesting, isn't it? A lot of them were expat South Africans who maybe fed the country out of fear, but then they were whooping you. Was that cathartic for them, do you think?
A lot of people left at that time, and a lot of people left. Juluka ended in 1985, and the Savuka project started in 86, 87. And whereas Juluka was a cultural statement of the fact that South Africans can celebrate each other's language and culture and turn it into a crossover mix, which is unique to South Africa. The Savuka project was more political. It was more, you know, Asimbonanga Mandela, it was Missing, it was all of those songs around what was happening to us in South Africa politically. And I think, just coming back to your question, African Sky Blue was a song which was a prayer for all us South Africans to say, whether it's a miner who's, you know, 2 miles underground, digging, following this magical seam of gold, like the breadcrumbs in Hansel and Gretel, to make a living, to send money back home to the rural areas to support his family, whether it was that or anyone else. His journey is our journey. We're all part of that journey. And like him, because when something happens underground, the first thing a miner thinks of is the same African Sky Blue that we see every day when we wake up. And that African Sky Blue is what we share. So it became a kind of an anthem. It was the second hit. Our first hit was Impi, and that became the second hit. And these were crossover hits. In other words, we had students, we had migrant workers, we had township people who came to our shows. So we had a very broad audience who took different things out of it. That was interesting to me as a writer, that, you know, a township person didn't quite understand some of the more traditional tribal references to certain songs, but they found it funny that a white man was writing about it and putting it in a song. So they supported it.
And then tell us about when Nelson Mandela joined you on stage and you didn't know he was there.
In 1986, I wrote Asimbonanga, and it was banned in South Africa. But it became an underground hit, and was sung in different, funerals and other events. And it went to #1 in France, Switzerland, Belgium, and top 40 in Europe. We were then, so I wrote that in '86. In 1997, which is 11 years later, I was touring Germany with my band, and we got a request from advertising agency was working on behalf of the government, the German government, to say there's a meeting of NGOs, African NGOs from different African countries, and they want to wrap up this 3-day conference with a show. Could we make it? And we looked at our schedule, we could. So we said, yes, we'll take the gig. And we were put into this hall and we did a sound check. It was quite a slapdash thing. It was a last minute booking, really. And we did our show, and it was about 2,000 people in the hall, and we finished up with Asimbonanga. And I started playing, and in the first chorus, when we started Asimbonanga, the crowd, they went, wow! And I thought, gee,
I'm doing well.
I'm doing well. Yeah, they know my song. It's incredible. But what I didn't know is that Nelson Mandela was walking slowly back behind me onto stage, and he had been the keynote speaker who opened the event, but we were not told that. Yeah. And he walked on with Mandisa, my backing vocalist, and then came up, and it was just a incredible moment. I think for me as a songwriter, writing that song in Bertram's, in an old, bad, rotten house that was being rented out for rehearsals. When that song came to me, it was impossible in my brain to ever think that anything would happen with it. But that 11 years later, South Africa would be free, and that I would be in another country playing it, and the man that I wrote it for would walk on stage and sing it with me. I mean, it's just an incredible moment in my life.
Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.